And we begin tonight with a number that tells you everything about where this conflict stands right now. 7. This is day 7 of the U.S.-Israel military campaign against Iran. And in those 7 days, the city of Tehran, the capital of the Islamic Republic, a city of nearly 10 million people, has been struck by military forces not once, not twice, but in wave after wave of coordinated air attacks arriving every few hours. Not every few days, every few hours. That rhythm, the relentless, sustained, around-the-clock pace of these strikes, is deliberate. It is not just about destroying targets. It is about destroying the ability of Iran's leadership to rest, to regroup, to reorganize, to communicate, and to make coherent decisions under sustained pressure. Military strategists call it tempo, and right now, the tempo of this war belongs entirely to the United States and Israel. Let's take stock of where we are on day 7, because the picture that has emerged over the course of this week is one that few analysts predicted would develop this quickly, this decisively, or with this level of coordinated precision between American and Israeli forces. Iran's supreme leader is dead. He was killed in the opening hours of Operation Epic Fury. The name U.S. and Israeli commanders have given to this campaign. The circumstances of his death reveal the sophistication of the operation. In the hours before the strike, Israeli commanders were publicly sent home. Coordinated social media posts suggested a quiet night. A carefully worded statement from the White House signaled no imminent action. Iranian leadership watched all of it and believed it. The supreme leader stayed above ground. 50 Israeli fighter jets entered Iranian airspace. 100 munitions. He never reached the bunker built specifically to protect him. 40-plus senior Iranian officials died alongside him. That was day 1. Since then, the strikes have not stopped. They have intensified. Tehran has now been hit 15 times. Iran's navy, 24 ships, was eliminated in the first 3 days. Air defense systems across the country have been systematically dismantled. Ballistic missile launchers are being destroyed within minutes of firing. And tonight, with the conflict entering its 7th day, U.S. military commanders are signaling that air power over Iran is about to surge even further. The human dimension of this conflict is significant and cannot be reduced to military statistics alone. In Tehran tonight, residents are living under the sound of air raid sirens and the visible glow of distant explosions. In Beirut, families are being displaced from southern neighborhoods as Israeli forces continue striking Hezbollah strongholds. One displaced Lebanese resident described their situation simply. They threatened the area. We packed our things and left. Now we are living a displaced, miserable life. That human reality exists alongside every military briefing, every strategic assessment, every presidential statement. And yet the military campaign is showing no signs of pausing. Iran overnight launched another wave of ballistic missiles at Israel. Several were intercepted. One was captured on camera overshooting its target entirely and crashing into the Mediterranean Sea. Israel struck 6 more missile launchers in response. The platforms that fired those missiles no longer exist this morning. Iran is expending its missile inventory faster than any realistic assessment suggests it can replace it, especially with its production facilities now under active bombardment. Iran's president posted to social media this morning, notably not addressing nuclear aspirations or missile programs, stating that some countries have initiated mediation efforts and that Iran is committed to lasting peace but will defend itself. The language was careful, measured, noticeably different from the defiant rhetoric of the conflict's opening days. Analysts watching the Iranian government's public communications note the shift and what it may signal about the internal state of a leadership that has lost its supreme leader, 40 senior officials, its navy, and significant portions of its air defense network in the space of 7 days. President Trump's response to Iran's reported outreach for negotiations was unambiguous. He posted to Truth Social that there will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender. He called on every IRGC soldier, every military officer, every Iranian diplomat to lay down their arms and request asylum in exchange for immunity. The alternative, in the president's words, death is guaranteed. 7 days in, strikes every few hours, and no end in sight, unless Iran moves toward the only exit the United States has left open. When we come back, on the ground in Tehran, what residents are experiencing, what the strikes are hitting, and what the city looks like on day 7 of this conflict. Tehran hit 15 times, Iran's military infrastructure being systematically dismantled around the clock. Now I want to bring this closer to ground level, because behind every military briefing, behind every strike count, behind every presidential statement, there's a city. 10 million people. And tonight that city is living through something it has not experienced in its modern history. Tehran is under siege. Not in the classical military sense. U.S. and Israeli forces are not surrounding the city with ground troops, but in the operational sense that matters to the people living there. The city is being struck repeatedly, unpredictably, and with a frequency that has made normal life impossible. Strikes every few hours. Air raid alerts. The sound and light of explosions visible from residential neighborhoods. A population that goes to sleep not knowing whether they will be awakened by sirens. What are the strikes hitting? Based on confirmed reporting and official statements from U.S. and Israeli military sources, the target set in and around Tehran has included Iran's air defense infrastructure, command and control facilities, military communications networks, IRGC operational headquarters, and, critically, the bunker complex that Iran's former supreme leader had designated as his refuge in the event of exactly this kind of attack. That bunker was struck with over 100 munitions. It is gone. The targeting logic is precise. This is not a campaign designed to destroy civilian infrastructure, power grids, water systems, residential neighborhoods. The stated objective from both Washington and Tel Aviv is the elimination of Iran's military capability and the regime's ability to command and project force. U.S. military officials have been consistent on this point. The targets are military. The goal is the permanent degradation of Iran's ability to threaten its neighbors, support proxy forces, and develop weapons capable of reaching beyond its borders. But precision targeting does not mean the absence of civilian impact. War does not work that way. In a city of 10 million people, sustained military strikes on command centers, military facilities, and infrastructure nodes create fear, displacement, economic disruption, and psychological trauma on a scale that statistics cannot fully capture. The residents of Tehran did not choose this conflict. They are living inside it. Iran's government has been managing its public communications carefully throughout this week. State media has continued operating. Official statements have been released. The president has posted to social media. But the nature of those communications has changed noticeably since the opening days of the conflict. The defiant, confrontational tone of Iran's initial response has given way to more measured language, references to mediation efforts, commitments to peace, carefully worded statements that avoid specific military claims. Analysts reading Iranian state media this morning note what is not being said as much as what is. There are no claims of successful retaliatory strikes, no declarations of military victories, no specific threats of escalation. What there is language that sounds increasingly like a government trying to find an exit without appearing to have surrendered. That is the internal political challenge facing whatever remains of Iran's leadership right now. The supreme leader is dead. The chain of command has been fractured. The House Intelligence Chairman described the situation this morning in terms that are worth repeating. He said what we may be witnessing is the complete degradation of Iranian command and control, with isolated IRGC units acting unilaterally, without orders, without coordination. A military lashing out in every direction without strategic direction. The evidence for that assessment is visible in Iran's behavior over the past 7 days. Tehran has attacked 12 countries, including Gulf states that had no role in initiating this conflict and every incentive to stay neutral. Jordan, Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain, nations that Iranian leadership, if it were functioning strategically, would be cultivating as diplomatic allies right now. Instead, they were attacked. And every one of them has moved closer to Washington as a result. Meanwhile, Russia's role in this conflict has taken on new significance this morning. The Washington Post is reporting that Russia is actively providing Iran with targeting intelligence on U.S. warships and aircraft. That means American pilots operating over Iran are being targeted using Russian intelligence feeds in real time. That is a direct escalation, one that extends the implications of this conflict far beyond the Middle East and into the broader framework of U.S.-Russia relations. The international reaction. Which countries are calling for ceasefire, which are quietly supporting the campaign, and what the next phase of this war means for the region and the world. No conflict of this scale happens in isolation. The U.S.-Israel campaign against Iran is reshaping alliances, testing relationships, and forcing governments around the world to define where they stand, quickly and publicly. Tonight, I want to walk through the international picture, because the diplomatic and geopolitical dimensions of this war are as significant as the military ones. Let's start with the Gulf states, because their position in this conflict is one of the most consequential and least discussed elements of the past 7 days. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Jordan, these are nations that have, for decades, maintained a careful balance, hosting U.S. military assets on their soil while maintaining trade relationships with Iran and avoiding direct confrontation with Tehran. That balance has been shattered, not by Washington, not by Tel Aviv, but by Tehran itself. Iran has attacked 12 countries since Operation Epic Fury began. Gulf states that wanted neutrality were struck anyway. The strategic logic, if there was any, appears to have broken down entirely as Iran's command structure is fragmented. The result is that nations which entered this conflict hoping to stay on the sidelines have been pulled directly into the American orbit. The House Intelligence Chairman said this morning that Iran's attacks on its own neighbors make no sense strategically, and he is right. Every strike Iran launches against a Gulf state is a strike against its own potential diplomatic allies. Every one of those nations is now more likely to support, facilitate, or at minimum, not obstruct the U.S.-Israel campaign than they were 7 days ago. The United States military presence in the Gulf is substantial and now more openly supported than at any point in recent memory. The Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, air assets in Qatar, THAAD and Patriot batteries across the region. These installations are not just logistical support for the campaign. They are the forward infrastructure of a sustained air war, and the host nations are not asking American forces to leave. Europe's reaction has been more divided. Several NATO allies have called publicly for restraint and a diplomatic resolution, language that is standard in European crisis diplomacy and carries little operational weight, given that the United States is not seeking European authorization for this campaign. Behind the scenes, European intelligence agencies are sharing information. European airspace and logistics infrastructure are supporting U.S. operations indirectly. The public calls for ceasefire and the private operational cooperation are running on parallel tracks, as they typically do in conflicts where American military power is the decisive factor. China has issued statements calling for de-escalation and the protection of civilian lives, positioning itself as the responsible global voice for restraint without taking any action that would meaningfully constrain either side. Beijing's primary concern in this conflict is not Iran, it is oil. Iran's remaining ability to threaten the Strait of Hormuz, through which a significant portion of global energy supply flows, is an economic threat that China is watching with acute concern. Any disruption to Gulf oil flows hits Chinese industry directly and immediately. Beijing wants this war to end, but not because of any particular affection for the Iranian regime, because the economic consequences of a prolonged conflict in the world's most critical energy corridor are ones China cannot absorb without significant domestic impact. Russia's position is the most dangerous variable in the current equation. The Washington Post report on Russian targeting intelligence being fed to Iran is not a minor diplomatic incident. It is Russia actively enabling attacks on American military personnel. That crosses a threshold that the Biden administration would have spent months debating how to characterize. The President administration's response is being watched closely, not just in Moscow and Tehran, but in every capital where American credibility and red lines are being assessed in real time. Domestically, the conflict is also creating political pressure points. The House Intelligence Chairman referenced the Austin attack this morning as a reminder that the war's reach extends to American soil. Congress is being asked to function as a funding and oversight body in the middle of an active conflict, while simultaneously conducting political negotiations over DHS appropriations that have nothing to do with national security and everything to do with leverage. That dysfunction has real consequences when the threat level at home is rising. I want to address the question that is on every viewer's mind, the question being asked in living rooms, in offices, in the halls of Congress, and in foreign ministries around the world tonight. How does this end? It is the right question. And tonight, for the first time since Operation Epic Fury began 7 days ago, there are enough data points on the table to give a serious, grounded answer. Not a prediction, but an assessment of the realistic pathways forward based on what we know right now. There are 3 scenarios being discussed seriously by analysts, military officials, and diplomatic sources. Let's walk through each one. The first scenario is the one President Trump has publicly defined as the American objective: unconditional surrender. The President posted to Truth Social this morning in language that left no room for ambiguity. No deal except unconditional surrender. Followed by a transition to new Iranian leadership. Followed by American-led reconstruction of Iran. Quote, bigger, better, and stronger than ever before. This is not a negotiating position. It is a war termination framework. The President has also extended a specific offer to individuals inside Iran's military and government. Lay down your arms, request asylum, receive immunity. This offer is designed to accelerate the collapse of Iran's remaining military cohesion from the inside, giving rational actors within the IRGC and Iranian military a personal incentive to stop fighting before the escalating air campaign makes that decision for them. The conditions for this scenario are being actively created by the military campaign. Tehran struck every few hours. Command structure collapsing, Navy gone, air defenses dismantled, missile launchers destroyed in real time, 40-plus senior officials dead alongside the supreme leader. The cumulative effect of 7 days of sustained strikes is a regime that is losing its ability to function, not just militarily, but administratively, communicatively, and politically. Iran is reportedly making calls. The president says it's too late for a deal with odds, but the calls are happening. That is movement. The second scenario is a negotiated pause, not the unconditional surrender Washington is demanding, but a ceasefire agreement brokered through a third party, likely involving Qatar or Oman, both of which have historically served as back-channel intermediaries between Washington and Tehran. Iran's president referenced mediation efforts in his social media post this morning, carefully, without specifics, but the reference was there. A negotiated pause would likely require Iran to make significant concessions on its missile program and nuclear activities in exchange for a halt to the strikes. Whether the President administration is willing to accept anything short of unconditional surrender is the central question here. Based on everything the President has said publicly, the answer appears to be no, but back-channel diplomacy and public statements do not always tell the same story. The third scenario, and the one that carries the most dangerous implications, is escalation beyond the current parameters. Russia providing targeting data to Iran is the most significant escalatory signal of the past 24 hours. If American aircraft are shot down using Russian intelligence, the pressure on Washington to respond directly to Moscow, not just to Tehran, becomes intense. That is a scenario that transforms this conflict from a regional war into something with global dimensions. It is not the most likely outcome, but it is on the table in a way it was not 72 hours ago. What makes the next 72 hours particularly critical is the convergence of several timelines. Netanyahu's cabinet is defining phase 2 right now. The airpower surge is being prepared. Iran's missile inventory is being attrited hourly. The domestic threat level inside the United States is elevated, and somewhere inside whatever remains of Iran's leadership structure, people are making decisions about whether to fight, whether to negotiate, whether to surrender, or whether to escalate in ways that bring in external actors. 7 days ago, Operation Epic Fury began with a deception. Israeli commanders went home for dinner. The supreme leader stayed above ground. 50 jets took off for Tehran. The opening move of this conflict was defined by patience, precision, and the willingness to wait for exactly the right moment. The question tonight, on day 7, is whether Iran's remaining leadership has the clarity to recognize the moment they are in. The strikes are coming every few hours. The surge is being prepared. The president's terms are on the table, and the clock is running.